The Avesta/VST/ is the primary collection of sacred texts of Zoroastrianism, composed in the otherwise unrecorded Avestan language. The Avestas texts fall into several different categories, arranged either by dialect, or by usage. The principal text in the liturgical group is the Yasna, which takes its name from the Yasna ceremony, Zoroastrianism's primary act of worship, and at which the Yasna text is recited. The most important portion of the Yasna texts are the 5 gathas, consisting of 17 hymns attributed to Zoroaster himself. These hymns, together with 5 other short Old Avestan texts that are also part of the Yasna, are in the Old, or Gathic, Avestan language. The remainder of the Yasna's texts are in Younger Avestan, which is not only from a later stage of the language, but also from a different geographic region. Extensions to the Yasna ceremony include the texts of the Vendidad and the Visparad. The Visparad extensions consists mainly of additional invocations of the divinities, Avestas, while the Vendidad is a mixed collection of prose texts mostly dealing with purity laws. Even today, the Vendidad is the only liturgical text that is not recited entirely from memory. Some of the materials of the extended Yasna are from the Yashts, which are hymns to the individual Avestas. Unlike the Yasna, Visparad, and Vendidad, the Yashts and the other lesser texts of the Avesta are no longer used liturgically in high rituals. Aside from the Yashts, these other lesser texts include the niche texts, the Ga texts, the Sarasa, and various other fragments. Together, these lesser texts are conventionally called Corde Avesta or Little Avesta texts. When the first Corde Avesta editions were printed in the 19th century, these texts, together with some non-Avestan language prayers, became a book of common prayer for lay people. The surviving texts of the Avesta, as they exist today, derive from a single master copy produced by Sasanian era, 224 to 651 CE, collation and recension. That master copy, now lost, is known as the Sasanian archetype. The oldest surviving manuscript of an Avestan language text is dated 1323 CE. Summaries of the various Avesta texts found in the 9th/10th century texts of Zoroastrian tradition suggest that about 3/4 of the corpus has since been lost. A pre-Sasanian history of the Avesta, if it had one, is in the realm of legend and myth. The oldest surviving versions of these tales are found in the 9th to 11th century texts of Zoroastrian tradition, i.e. in the so-called Pahlavi books. The legends run as follows: the 21 Nasks books of the Avesta were created by Ahura Mazda and brought by Zoroaster to his patron Vishtaspa. Supposedly, Vishtaspa or another Kayunian, Duray, DK4b, then had 2 copies made, one of which was stored in the treasury, and the other in the royal archives following Alexander's conquest. The Avesta was then supposedly destroyed or dispersed by the Greeks after they translated the scientific passages that they could make use of several centuries later. One of the Arsacid kings named Valaksher, one of the Vologases, supposedly then had the fragments collected, not only of those that had previously been written down, but also of those that had only been orally transmitted. The Denkard also transmits another legend related to the transmission of the Avesta. In that story, credit for collation and recension is given to the early Sasanidara priest Tansar, high priest under Ardashir I, R224-242, and Shapur I, R240-242-272, who had the scattered works collected, and of which he approved only a part as authoritative. Tansar's work was then supposedly completed by Adurbad Maraspandan, high priest of Shapur II, R309-379, who made a general revision of the canon and continued to ensure its orthodoxy. A final revision was supposedly undertaken in the 6th century under Khusro Anushiravan. In the early 20th century, the legend of the Arsacid collation engendered a search for an Arsacid archetype of the Avesta. In the theory of Friedrich Karl Andreas, 1902, the archaic nature of the Avestan texts was assumed to be due to preservation via written transmission, and unusual or unexpected spellings in the surviving texts were assumed to be reflections of errors introduced by Sasanian era transcription from the Arsacid era Aramaic-derived consonantal alphabet, Arsacid Pahlavi script. The search for the Arsacid archetype was increasingly criticized in the 1940s and was eventually abandoned in the 1950s. After Karl Hoffmann demonstrated that the inconsistencies noted by Andreas were actually due to unconscious alterations introduced by oral transmission. Hoffmann identifies these changes to be due in part to modifications introduced through recitation, in part to influences from other Iranian languages picked up on the route of transmission from somewhere in eastern Iran, i.e. Central Asia, via Aurashosia and Sistan through to Persia, and in part due to the influence of phonetic developments in the Avestan language itself. The legends of an Arsacid era collation and recension are no longer taken seriously. It is now certain that for most of their long history the Avesta's various texts were handed down orally, and independently of one another, and that it was not until around the 5th or 6th century that they were committed to written form. However, during their long history, only the Gathic texts seem to have been memorized, more or less, exactly. The other less sacred works appear to have been handed down in a more fluid oral tradition, and were partly composed afresh with each generation of poet-priests, sometimes with the addition of new material. The younger Avestan texts are therefore composite works, with contributions from several different authors over the course of several hundred years. The texts became available to European scholarship comparatively late. Abraham Ainquetil-Duperon travelled to India in 1755, and discovered the texts among Indian Zoroastrian, Parsi, communities. He published a set of French translations in 1771, based on translations provided by a Parsi priest. Ainquetil-Duperon's translations were at first dismissed as a forgery in poor Sanskrit, but he was vindicated in the 1820s following Rasmus Rask's examination of the Avestan language, a dissertation on the authenticity of the Zend language, Bombay, 1821. Rask also established that Ainquetil-Duperon's manuscripts were a fragment of a much larger literature of sacred texts. Ainquetil-Duperon's manuscripts are at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, P-Series manuscripts, while Rask's collection now lies in the Royal Danish Library, Copenhagen, K-Series. Other large Avestan language manuscript collections are those of the British Museum, L-Series, the K.R. Oriental Library in Bombay, the Meherji Rana Library in Navsari, and at various university and national libraries in Europe. The term Avesta is from Zoroastrian tradition. The meaning of the word is uncertain. Many etymologies have been suggested, but none has been universally accepted. Structure and content. In its present form, the Avesta is a compilation from various sources, and its different parts date from different periods and vary widely in character. Only texts in the Avestan language are considered part of the Avesta. There are strong linguistic and cultural similarities between the texts of the Avesta and those of the Vedas. The similarities are assumed to reflect the common beliefs of Proto-Indo-Iranian times, with the differences then assumed to reflect independent evolution that occurred after the prehistorical split of the two cultures. According to Denkard, the 21 Nasks, books, mirror the structure of the 21-word-long Ahana Varya prayer. Each of the 3 lines of the prayer consists of 7 words. Correspondingly, the Nasks are divided into 3 groups, of 7 volumes per group. Originally, each volume had a word of the prayer as its name, which so marked a volume's position relative to the other volumes. Only about a quarter of the text from the Nasks has survived until today. The contents of the Avesta are divided topically, even though the organization of the Nasks is not, but these are not fixed or canonical. Some scholars prefer to place the categories in 2 groups, the one liturgical, and the other general. The following categorization is as described by Jean Kellens, see bibliography, below. The Yasna. The Yasna, from Yazan worship, oblations, cognate with Sanskrit yajna, is the primary liturgical collection, named after the ceremony at which it is recited. It consists of 72 sections called the Ha'iti or Ha. The 72 threads of lamb's wool in the Kushti, the sacred thread worn by Zoroastrians, represent these sections. The central portion of the Yasna is the Gathas, the oldest and most sacred portion of the Avesta, believed to have been composed by Zarathustra, Zoroaster, himself. The Gathas are structurally interrupted by the Yasna Haptang Hadi, 7-chapter Yasna, which makes up chapters 35 to 42 of the Yasna and is almost as old as the Gathas, consists of prayers and hymns in honor of the Supreme Deity, Ahura Mazda, the angels, fire, water, and earth. The younger Yasna, though handed down in prose, may once have been metrical, as the Gathas still are. The Visparad. The Visparad, from Vispratavo, prayer to all patrons, is a collection of supplements to the Yasna citation needed. The Visparad is subdivided into 23 or 24 cardo sections that are interleaved into the Yasna during a Visparad service, which is an extended Yasna service. The Visparad collection has no unity of its own, and is never recited separately from the Yasna. The Vendidad. The Vendidad, or Vidvd, a corruption of Avestan 6 Devodta, given against the demons, is an enumeration of various manifestations of evil spirits, and ways to confound them. The Vendidad includes all of the 19th Nask, which is the only Nask that has survived in its entirety. The text consists of 22 fargards, fragments arranged as discussions between Ahura Mazda and Zoroaster. The first fargard is a dualistic creation myth, followed by the description of a destructive winter on the lines of the deluge mythology. The second fargard recounts the legend of Yuma. The remaining fargards deal primarily with hygiene, care of the dead in particular, fargard 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 16, 17, 19 as well as disease and spells to fight it 7, 10, 11, 13, 20, 21, 22. Fargards 4 and 15 discuss the dignity of wealth and charity, of marriage and of physical effort, and the indignity of unacceptable social behavior such as assault and breach of contract, and specify the penances required to atone for violations thereof. The Vendidad is an ecclesiastical code, not a liturgical manual, and there is a degree of moral relativism apparent in the codes of conduct. The Vendidad's different parts vary widely in character and in age. Some parts may be comparatively recent in origin, although the greater part is very old. The Vendidad, unlike the Yasna and the Visparad, is a book of moral laws rather than the record of a liturgical ceremony. However, there is a ceremony called the Vendidad, in which the Yasna is recited with all the chapters of both the Visparad and the Vendidad inserted at appropriate points. This ceremony is only performed at night. The Yashts. The Yashts, from Yeti, worship by praise, are a collection of 21 hymns, each dedicated to a particular divinity or divine concept. 3 hymns of the Yasna liturgy that worship by praise are in tradition also nominally called Yashts, but are not counted among the Yasht collection since the 3 are a part of the primary liturgy. The Yashts vary greatly in style, quality, and extent. In their present form, they are all in prose, but analysis suggests that they may at one time have been in verse. The Sariza. The Sariza, 30 days, is an enumeration and invocation of the 30 divinities presiding over the days of the month. Cf. Zoroastrian calendar. The Sariza exists in 2 forms. The shorter, Little Sariza, is a brief enumeration of the divinities with their epithets in the genitive. The longer, Great Sariza, has complete sentences and sections, with the Yazatas being addressed in the accusative. The Sariza is never recited as a whole, but is a source for individual sentences devoted to particular divinities, to be inserted at appropriate points in the liturgy depending on the day and the month. The Nish and Ga. The 5 Nish, abbreviated New York, are prayers for regular recitation by both priests and laity too. They are addressed to the sun and Mithra, recited together thrice a day, to the moon, recited thrice a month, and to the waters and to fire. The Nyaya-Eshas are composite texts containing selections from the Gathas and the Yashts, as well as later material. The 5 Ga are similar to the 5 Nish texts. The 5 Ga contain invocations to the 5 divinities that watch over the 5 divisions, Ga, of the 24-hour day. The Afrin Agan. The Afrin Agans are 4 blessing texts recited on a particular occasion, the first in honor of the dead, the second on the 5 epigomenal days that end the year, the third is recited at the 6 seasonal feasts, and the fourth at the beginning and end of summer. Fragments. All material in the Avesta that is not already present in one of the other categories falls into a fragments category, which, as the name suggests, includes incomplete texts. There are altogether more than 20 fragment collections, many of which have no name, and are then named after their owner/collator, or only a Middle Persian name. The more important of the fragment collections are the Naranjistan fragments, 18 of which constitute the Erbadistan, the Persishniha questions, also known as fragments Tamuras, and the Hadith Nask volume of the scriptures with 2 fragments of eschatological significance. Other Zoroastrian religious texts. Only texts preserved in the Avestan language count as scripture and are part of the Avesta. Several other secondary works are nonetheless crucial to Zoroastrian theology and scholarship. The most notable among the Middle Persian texts are the Deen Card, Acts of Religion, dating from the 9th century, the Bundaishan, Primordial Creation, finished in the 11th or 12th century, but containing older material, the Mainagai Kairad, Spirit of Wisdom, a religious conference on questions of faith, and the Artaviraf Namak, Book of Artaviraf, which is especially important for its views on death, salvation, and life in the hereafter. Of the post-14th century works, all in New Persian, only the Sad Dar, 100 Doors or chapters, and Rivayats, traditional treatises, are of doctrinal importance. Other texts such as Zartushtnama, Book of Zoroaster, are only notable for their preservation of legend and folklore. The Ao Jamatika we accept, a treatise on death, is based on quotations from the Avesta. The Avesta/VST/ is the primary collection of sacred texts of Zoroastrianism, composed in the otherwise unrecorded Avestan language. The Avesta's texts fall into several different categories, arranged either by dialect, or by usage. The principal text in the liturgical group is the Yasna, which takes its name from the Yasna ceremony, Zoroastrianism's primary act of worship, and at which the Yasna text is recited. The most important portion of the Yasna texts are the 5 Gathas, consisting of 17 hymns attributed to Zoroaster himself. These hymns, together with 5 other short Old Avestan texts that are also part of the Yasna, are in the Old, or Gathic, Avestan language. The remainder of the Yasna's texts are in Younger Avestan, which is not only from a later stage of the language, but also from a different geographic region. Extensions to the Yasna ceremony include the texts of the Vendidat and the Visparad. The Visparad extensions consists mainly of additional invocations of the divinities, Yazatas, while the Vendidat is a mixed collection of prose texts mostly dealing with called Corde Avesta or Little Avesta texts. When the first Corde Avesta editions were printed in the 19th century, these texts, together with some non-Avestan language prayers, became a book of common prayer for lay people. The surviving texts of the Avesta, as they exist today, derive from a single master copy produced by Sasanian era, 224 to 651 CE, collation and recension. That master copy, now lost, is known as the Sasanian archetype. The oldest surviving manuscript of an Avestan language text is dated 1323 CE. Summaries of the various Avesta texts found in the 9th/10th century texts of Zoroastrian tradition suggest that about 3/4 of the corpus has since been lost. A pre-Sasanian history of the Avesta, if it had one, is in the realm of legend and myth. The oldest surviving versions of these tales are found in the 9th to 11th century texts of Zoroastrian tradition, i.e. in the so-called Pahlavi books. The legends run as follows: the 21 Nasks books of the Aveth purity laws. Even today, the Vendidat is the only liturgical text that is not recited entirely from memory. Some of the materials of the extended Yasna are from the Yashts, which are hymns to the individual Yazatas. Unlike the Yasna, Visparad, and Vendidat, the Yashts and the other lesser texts of the Avesta are no longer used liturgically in high rituals. Aside from the Yashts, these other lesser texts include the niche texts, the Ga texts, the Saraza, and various other fragments. Together, these lesser texts are conventionally